Now, the Aaronic priesthood began at the Feast of Shavuot. And it's really important that we see this feast concept here, all right? Shavuot happened 53 days after Passover, the very first Passover in Egypt. They're leaving Egypt, okay? And it ended, I believe, on the true Passover that took place in AD 30, all right? So the Passover we see in Acts chapter 2, that's the end of the priesthood. The priesthood starts at Shavuot, which is Pentecost, the first Pentecost. It ends in Acts 2 at that. Now, what replaced the Aaronic priesthood at that time, at the true Passover in Acts 2? It was the Melchizedekian priesthood. Look at Hebrews 5, 5, and 6. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made high priest, but he was appointed by him who said, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." All right, so this is Christ's priesthood. It's superior. He goes on in chapter 6, 19 and 20 to say, "We have this a sure and steadfast anchor for the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Yeshua has gone as a forerunner in our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So the priesthood of Christ, which I believe started on Pentecost, ended the Aaronic priesthood on Pentecost. Now let's back up to the original Pentecost and see this. Exodus 19, 18 and 19. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because Yahweh had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. And Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. So Moses goes up on the mountain alone. As he nears the top, he hears this mighty voice announce the 10 Commandments. All right? No date is actually given in about when the Decalogue was provided here. The Bible doesn't give us a date. But if you ask any observant Israelite concerning the event, they're going to tell you it was celebrated 50 days from the Feast of First Fruits. That is Shavuot, that is Pentecost. So a very notable historical event happened on the very first Shavuot after they left Egypt, and that was the giving of the 10 Commandments. Israel came to Mount Sinai on the third day of the third month, according to Exodus 19:1, and Yahweh visited the people 3 days later in Exodus 19, 10 through 17. Therefore, the law was given by God on the 6th day of the third month of the biblical religious calendar, which is the month Sivan. Now, this day is exactly 50 days from the crossing of the Red Sea. So Shavuot is called the season of the giving of Torah in Hebrew. Okay, so they're at the mountain, they're receiving the law of God. This is Shavuot. We call it Pentecost. Pentecost is Greek, it means 50. Shavuot is the feast that they're celebrating here, and it's the feast of giving the law. Now, Shavuot at Mount Sinai is sometimes considered the day on which Jerusalem was born. And that totally makes sense. They're given the law. They're entering into a covenant with God on this Shavuot. All right? Now, think about that, because at Pentecost in Acts 2, what's happening? This is the church is born, and the church is given the law of God. All right? So, from Adam to Moses, I believe God's people were under the priesthood of Melchizedek. Then, in the 40-year Exodus period, the priesthood shifted. Right at the very beginning of that 40 years, they're given the law of God, and then they got a 40-year transition. The priesthood continued, I believe, until the birth of the church on Pentecost, where it shifted to the everlasting priesthood of Melchizedek. So between the two priesthoods of Melchizedek, who was a type, and the antitype, we have Israel and the Aaronic priesthood. So Old Covenant Israel, listen to me, is bracketed by two transition periods, by two 40-year periods. And Israel is bracketed by those. All right, so we have a universal priesthood of Melchizedek from the beginning of time until Israel is established at Mount Sinai. Then we have a national priesthood that runs from that first transition period when the law is given to the last Pentecost that happens in Acts 2. And then we go back to an everlasting priesthood in Acts chapter 2. So you know how dispensationalists say that the church is a parenthesis. I think Israel's a parenthesis. Okay? And God dealt with mankind. After this 40 years, he's dealing with Israel. That stops in 40 years, we're in the church. Okay, so 2 40-year periods bracket the existence of Israel and the priesthood of Israel.